Welcome everybody to the webinar Advantages of Integrating Spinnaker with Container Platforms. My name is Mark Levy and I'll be hosting today's webinar. I focus on product marketing here at OpsMX. First, a few housekeeping items. The session today is 50 minutes long. We're recording the session. We'll send you the recording and the slides to anyone who requests them. Please ask questions in the chat. We will answer as many questions as we can. Well, I'd like to talk a little bit first about OpsMX. If you could advance the slide, Bob, that'd be great. We are dedicated to making the process of software delivery and continuous delivery easy and successful for you. We have a large number of customers of any size, from the most sophisticated, including customers like Salesforce and Cisco, to organizations that are now highly successful, even though they had little or no continuous delivery experience when we started working with them. What I'd like to do first is find out a little bit more about all of you. If you can please just take a moment to fill out the poll and tell us what you're currently doing with continuous delivery. We'd really appreciate that. And while you're filling that out, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Our speaker today is Bob Boulay. Bob is a technology enthusiast. Bob, I don't think enthusiast is a good enough, strong enough word. You are an expert, with passion for technology and making things work, along with this knack of helping people understand how things work, which is really, really important. That's why he's here today. He's got over 19 years of solution engineering experience, and he's really known for his dynamic and interactive Spinnaker and CI/CD presentations. I'm sure many of you have seen him already on this webinar series. Bob, how are you doing today?
I'm hanging in there, my friend, hanging in there. Looking forward to a great session today. I think we've got a lot of good stuff, and so I'm looking forward to diving in.
Well, why don't we end the poll then, and then let's move forward. Why don't you tell us about the topic today?
Great, thanks, Mark. Appreciate the kind introduction, and I really appreciate it. And welcome everybody to the session. For those of you that have seen me present before, I like to keep these things. It's really about the learnings, and I like to keep these things relatively informal. I do have a presentation that I want to follow, and sort of walk you through some material. As Mark had said, please feel free to ask questions. Don't be shy. If for some reason you don't want to ask a question in a sort of a public format, I always make myself available. I do a lot of work in the community, with our prospects, with our customers, or just random people that have questions about Spinnaker or about OpsMX and sort of how we bring value. And so today, the topic is going to be around container and serverless platform technologies. I think when I started thinking about this as a topic for a webinar, I was talking to Mark about how, there's a lot of people out there that haven't sort of, or in the middle of a digital transformation, right? So they may not be, still using, sort of more monolithic sort of on-premise sort of standard, either bare metal or VM type of scenarios for deployments. They may have containerized, but they're not quite yet at a place where they're ready to re-architect their application to sort of fit the Kubernetes model, or really get the most out of the Kubernetes model. And by the way, there are some folks that just won't get there. Kubernetes is not an absolute silver bullet. And so for some folks, sort of the way they've architected their applications and running them in containers, or using, some of the serverless technologies like Cloud Run or App Engine, or something along those lines. This is really what I want to talk about today. And give a little bit of history on sort of containers, and then, sort of walk you through, sort of some of the options that are available, and talk to you a little bit about where people are in their journey. And then talk a little bit about, sort of how OpsMX can help, And then the last bit of this, I always like to do with all these presentations, sort of a live demo or a walkthrough of the actual technology. Let's get our hands dirty and take a look at some examples of some pipelines that are doing deployments using Spinnaker to some of these platform technologies. So that's kind of roughly what I want to go through today. And so let's get started. Again, guys, my presentations always start with sort of some of the simplest explanations, and I always like to sort of make sure, because I don't know who's in the audience and sort of who I'm talking to in these webinars, some of the basics, right? So what is a container, right? And I think that most of us on the phone today probably already know this, but I want to make sure, right? And so containerizing applications, again, those of you that are familiar with Docker, and ultimately being able to sort of make these applications, when you containerize, making them portable, making them deployable, and sort of that next layer down of virtualization from sort of the VM scenario, but ultimately starting off with sort of that definition of what is a container. And again, I think it's really about sort of packaging everything up so that at runtime you just sort of turn this thing on and your application starts working. And so that's really where I think sort of a lot of us, and I'll sort of reveal my age here, got started with Docker and using some of the Docker technologies to ultimately be able to sort of take our applications from, sort of what might be considered more clunky style sort of installations. I know, being in the software business myself, watching that transformation as I went through and spending some time as a solution architect and as a product manager, sort of going through those sort of clunky install procedures to get something up and running, when quite frankly, being able to package something as a Docker container made more sense from that perspective. So it sort of changed the game, on both sides of the equation, whether you were, sort of somebody that is actually, sort of generating and producing applications for users and customers, or if you were consuming applications and sort of the way you went about deploying those things. And so, and a lot of us, again, we think about sort of how this space has evolved. It really has. I mean, it went from, sort of using, again, some basic technologies from Docker all the way up to and including now, sort of that cloud native model that we talk about with, that Kubernetes as that orchestration layer. And again, like I said, I think today we're going to talk about, sort of how do I leverage and how do I do deployments if I'm still sort of in that sort of just in that containerization space. And I want to ultimately go ahead and run my applications. I'm not ready for Kubernetes, or I'm not convinced that Kubernetes is right for me just yet. Sort of what are my options here? So with that said, again, I don't think any presentation like this is complete without sort of reviewing sort of where we've been. And again, this was the, part of my experience in terms of this business. And sort of, I remember I worked for a company called Black Duck Software, where we were going through sort of this transition. But even further back than that, going through the transition of, sort of watching Docker evolve into a way of, and containers as a way to sort of deliver software. And so, back then it was, you write the application code, you build the container image, you push that image to a registry, deploy the VM or the servers that are going to host your containers, and ultimately deploy the containers to those via the images that you've created. And again, there were technologies like Compose and Swarm that were available to sort of enable you to do this and make this happen. And again, I think, there was a fairly large shift there, right? From, again, figuring out sort of how am I going to deploy my application, or how is my customer going to deploy my application, right? And a move away from, sort of the homegrown sort of script-based, sort of deployment type of scenarios or install type of scenarios, where, you had to do something, you had to kludge something together in order to make sure that your all the elements for your software got installed inside of that VM or that bare metal machine. Here, you're shipping the complete package. And as a software publisher, obviously, this was very, very attractive because it gave you that end-to-end control of the environment. You no longer had to worry about the various environments that this thing could potentially be run in. It was one of those situations where you had a lot more control over it. And again, sort of this way of sort of building and containerizing these things, and then ultimately using those technologies that surrounded Docker to ultimately do those deployments. And then, again, it was one of those situations where if your application was made up of 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 containers, you would write a compose file that went ahead and now ultimately would launch all these things, pull them down from the registry, with the appropriate tags, and then ultimately go ahead and actually, sort of go through the process of installing. And it's the same thing with Swarm. A lot of these technologies they sort of laid the groundwork for where we are today. And again, a lot of us adopted this, right, because it made sense for us. And now, we're still in the process of that digital transformation. Now, Kubernetes came along and obviously changed the landscape, right? So now, we're dealing with end-to-end orchestration, right? In terms of here's my cluster, and I'll go ahead and actually deploy this thing. I'll, deal with workload scheduling decisions. I'll deal with resilience, pod level or container level resilience. It drove a new way of thinking about your app architecture as well. Now we're talking about, sort of that microservices architecture, and sort of breaking down our applications to that least common denominator. And looking at this sort of cloud native model, again, where, again, you've got a highly resilient sort of infrastructure that's deployed. Now, some of the challenges there, right? I mean, anytime sort of a transformational technology comes along, it's not just all upside, right? And with Kubernetes, obviously there's a lot of benefits there, and not a lot of downside necessarily outside of the downside that we face as organizations, right? So, it introduces a lot of change, right? So in order to really efficiently take advantage of this, what's my strategy? How am I going to go about doing this? What are the skills required, right? So again, with any sort of new or transformational technology, you have to ask yourself, what skills are required to manage the infrastructure? And do I need to re-architect my application to drive full value out of this? And not all applications will benefit. I mean, it doesn't mean that not all applications should eventually make their way there, but the compelling story around this, it may be that you're running an application that might not necessarily benefit from this. And so, again, I think the idea behind this though is that we've got this technology available to us, but the question then becomes, well, what if I'm not ready? What if I want to move to the cloud? I want to get, sort of away from sort of self-hosted. I want that reliance and that reliability that Kubernetes could give me, but I'm just not ready to do that. Or, I just don't want to manage this yet. Like, I'm not prepared. My business priorities are such that, I want to continue to go ahead and manage my applications, or it just simply makes sense to keep them, in sort of the format that they're in today. And so this is a challenge that a lot of organizations face is, sort of what is my strategy going to be here around sort of adopting this? And what if I don't? What happens if I don't, right? And sort of what are my options to get? Again, I want the upside, but I don't have the time right now or the resources, or it doesn't make sense for me to invest in sort of that re-architecture. And so, this is something, and I could probably hear a lot of you snickering at me now. This is a very, very homegrown slide. But I think, at the end of the day, this is not meant to be represent, anyone that is behind or anywhere. There's no, here's where you should be on this. It's simply meant to sort of relate, sort of the different steps in a journey, right? So a lot of us, if we go back far enough, we're deploying monoliths. So we were, sort of deploying that application to a fixed asset. That asset could have been a VM. That asset could have been a bare metal machine, and we were deploying to that fixed asset. And some of us are still doing this today. Now, it's evolved a touch in terms of using more immutable infrastructure, but there are still some of us that are, and it makes sense for us to be deploying to, say, EC2 instances, right? And we see this all the time in our work, and at least in my work, where customers are doing that, and it works for them. And what the gain they got is they are now moving to the cloud and getting the benefits of immutable infrastructure, and are able to start doing things like blue-green deployments or other sort of progressive deployment strategies, using that same sort of monolithic type of application strategy or application architecture that they've been using for years. And then there are some of us that have moved through to containerized workloads, right? So I've gone down the path of sort of containerizing my workload. I wanted to control the environment. I'm leveraging persistent data volumes, and I'm using, sort of that application layer as an immutable infrastructure piece, and ultimately creating containers that are associated with that, and ultimately being able to go through that update. This is really where we're going to talk today, and the examples that I'm going to show you today, as we get into the sort of lab portion or the demo portion, are going to focus on that piece of this. And then obviously then there's that move to sort of that microservices architecture, where I'm going and ultimately breaking my application down to even smaller chunks, isolating those services, being able to sort of update those services in isolation, and ultimately using Kubernetes or a Kubernetes type orchestration layer to ultimately orchestrate the delivery of that entire stack. And then once that's out there, again, I can go ahead and ultimately, because I've broken down my application, make much more fine-grained updates, right? I don't have to redeploy the entire stack if I want to make a change to sort of one segment of my application or microservice of my application. Now, the trouble here is obviously as you sort of move up and to the right, this represents higher investment, higher risk sort of type of work. And, I think that, when you start to try and figure out sort of how to go from, sort of pure containerized applications to, sort of that microservices architecture to really take advantage of the Kubernetes platform, it's again, a high risk, high investment type of scenario, because it oftentimes involves a re-architecture of your application. And then that begs the question, sort of what value am I getting, and what's the opportunity cost associated with that? Where, sort of where I'm at today is a place where I'm comfortable. And so this is, I think from the OpsMX perspective, where we see a lot of people that are coming to us and they're talking to us about, this journey. And, what they're concerned with is they've got application deployments that are happening across this entire spectrum. And really what they're after is the need to be able to support this entire spectrum, because they're not sure, or they don't know, right now, or at least today, sort of what the plan is for, sort of a re-architecting of a given application. And so they want to make sure that their CI/CD process is capable of supporting any application that happens to fall at any one of these three stations. And that's really where I think, Spinnaker, sort of drops in, because it offers that full layer of flexibility. Those of you that have come to other webinars I've done before have seen me, sort of do the Kubernetes style deployments, and how simple and easy that is to ultimately be able to go ahead and target, a Kubernetes cluster, push an application out, go end to end. Now today, what you're going to see is me do something a little different with, the Elastic Container Service, along with an example around Google App Engine. But again, I think this transformation here is key. And I think I'm not real happy with the way I put this together, because it sort of implies, I think maturity is the wrong access here. But anyway, I think that, the bottom line is that you kind of get a sense for, and can picture yourself, sort of on this curve, and ultimately understand sort of what your needs are around CI/CD. And then obviously today we'll talk specifically about the containerized piece. So again, I think most of us are in that middle ground spot, right? Where we haven't gone completely to Kubernetes yet. We've got some applications that are still monolithic in nature. We've still got some applications that have been containerized. What are my options? What is it that can be done? And I think, like anything else, the cloud providers have built the tooling for us, right? They've gone out there and they've put together, Elastic Container Services, Cloud Run from Google, Fargate and App Engine, from AWS and Google respectively, right? And this is just an example, guys. There are other things that are out there, Lambda, other sort of function style scenarios for applications, and they're all out there. And I think that they can very easily be implemented, and they provide us with the options that we need. They allow us to stay within our existing application architecture. There's no infrastructure to manage. Of course, that's the classic sort of cloud model, right? And I don't want you to have to wait until you're 100% quote unquote cloud native to be able to benefit from that. You continue to leverage the containerized application strategies. By the way, not for nothing, and I think you all know this, but even if you haven't containerized yet, I can use EC2, or I can use and Spinnaker, sort of will do all that for you as well. These for a lot of customers, these can be transitional technologies, right? So, look, I'm on my way to microservices, but I don't want to wait. I need to start to leverage the cloud. I need to start to get out of the infrastructure management business. But I'm not quite ready yet. And, again, so that's that last bullet, brings some of the benefits of Kubernetes without the architectural changes. These things here allow us to offload, sort of the management of that infrastructure, isolate our applications and let them run in the cloud, and let the cloud provider deal with that availability and that reliability. And I think that's, again, sort of under the heading of sort of cloud native, that's where we're looking ahead. We're all looking to, sort of get into a place where at least I know the companies that we've been talking to from a software perspective are looking to innovate. They're looking to, sort of go down that path of innovation and ultimately add value through the software that they write. They don't want to get caught up in worrying about whether or not it's available, or worry whether or not there's enough resources to run it. They want to focus on innovation, and they also want to make sure that as they're innovating, they can create as short a time as possible while safely deploying. Because I know some of you may have, I'm hoping some of you attended my last webinar around sort of progressive and safe deployments, while safely deploying, are able to go ahead and actually reduce the time from, sort of where the idea is born and, sort of on the whiteboard to when it's actually deployed and generating value to the user or to the customer. And so again, I think these services are here to help us, sort of make that happen. Now, again, some of this is a slightly older content, but I still think it's wildly relevant here, right? Because my attitude toward this whole thing, and the position I've taken, being just a very opinionated guy, is that it doesn't matter what your deployment vehicle looks like. You still face some of the same challenges, right? You still have to deploy at velocity. You still have to manage risk, and you still have to deliver quality, right? I mean, those things don't change. They don't change with your deployment strategy, right? Or they don't change with your application architecture strategy. These things are common, whether you're using Kubernetes, whether you're deploying to EC2 instances, whether you're deploying via App Engine, it doesn't matter. These are pillars that are always going to be there. And as DevOps professionals and SREs and anyone that's, sort of that persona that's sort of in that world of delivering software, these things are going to remain important to us regardless. And, I think, again, some of you may have seen one of my foundational webinars around this. And again, I think most of us would agree it's easy to deliver any two of these. But, unfortunately, the world is not a kind place, and we have to deliver all three. Now, this is another favorite of mine, guys, because, again, I don't think it matters around sort of the type of deployment you're doing. The cold hard facts here are, the faster you attempt to deliver applications without the appropriate tooling, the higher your failure rate's going to go. This is something that we've seen, and forget about Gartner for a moment and sort of their study. This is things that I've seen in my career, right? And I've been on both sides of the coin. I've been on, sort of the product side, where I've been working for startups where I've watched us try and ramp up, and get faster and deliver, and not really sort of attune for or account for, those scenarios where I'm going to get caught up in, sort of application risk or security risk. And you can start to see the cracks if you don't have the automation. So as I try and move faster, that's what happens. And then obviously on the OpsMX side, in the time that I've spent sort of as a solution architect in the DevOps world, I've seen this with customers where they start to hit the limits of what a CI tool can give them as it relates to CD. They start to hit those limits where lack of automation starts to force these types of failures on them, and then they're constantly playing defense instead of playing offense. And ultimately, this is something that happens, as you grow and as your business gets larger than a bread box, it just becomes harder and harder to maintain these things without some form of automation. And so, again, going back to, sort of where the friction points are when we look at this. And again, this content may look the same because it needs to be, right? It doesn't matter how I'm deploying, right? I need automation. So I need to make sure that, from an automation scenario part of the problem or an orchestration part of the problem, I have tooling that allows me to create these pipelines, that allows me to go ahead and actually meet those end needs, right? I need to be able to do canary deploys. I need to be able to make sure that I'm doing continuous verification. I need to make sure that I'm adhering to policy. So that, sort of automation there. And then the command and control problem, I need to take those gates and I need to make sure that they're first-class citizens in my pipelines. So if I have a problem with, a security issue, that I go ahead and identify it. If I have a problem with, and ultimately it's able to stop the pipeline. If I have a problem with, a policy situation, if I'm somebody that is under the Sarbanes-Oxley umbrella, and I need to make sure that I'm doing those policy checks for things like separation of duties. I need to make sure that I have auditability of these pipelines. I need to be able to bear out the efficacy of any given release in case I find a problem after the release has gone out. So again, these are the types of things that I need to manage. And, I think that, again, you may have heard me say this before, we're really at OpsMX trying to change the paradigm, right? We don't want you to stop your pipelines to go look for problems. In a lot of cases, that's what you're forced to do. I need to stop my pipeline and go make sure it adheres to policy, or I need to stop my pipeline. I need to review logs and metrics to make sure there isn't any anomalous behavior. Our attitude is we want to add automation to all that so that we're only stopping the pipeline when we find a problem, then going off and solving it, not stopping and looking for a problem. And in a lot of cases I won't find one, so I've stopped for no reason. That would obviously be in contradiction to my velocity tenet. So again, I think going through this process, making sure that you have what you need in order to be able to deploy this, regardless of sort of how you're deploying. Now, what does the solution look like? Again, I think it's fairly straightforward in terms of stabilizing that three-legged stool. We have to manage velocity, risk, and quality, right? So we have to have a command and control layer that sits over our pipelines and allows us to go ahead and ultimately make sure that from a velocity perspective, we have the CD tooling, the purpose-built CD tooling. So if I'm trying to use Jenkins to do this, I'm going to get caught up in sort of custom scripting, plug-in viability, right? Because a lot of the, Jenkins obviously as a CI tool has a tremendous open source community around it. One of the best I've seen, and I've seen a lot. But the problem there is that as you start to rely on these plugins, their sort of the pace that they move at in terms of their development, their support for newer versions of Jenkins are obviously going to differ from maybe your expectations. And so managing that without a real CD tool can be very, very tricky. That risk piece, again, if I'm under the heading of Sarbanes-Oxley or HIPAA or GDPR or one of these other things, how do I go ahead and ultimately, or something simple as, hey, I need to manage risk associated with sort of where this stuff gets deployed. I can't have someone come in and say, hey, instead of AWS, this thing is going to get deployed to GCP. I don't want to do that. I want to make sure that I have those guardrails all set up, and those guardrails are checked automatically. And then around quality, this goes back to that progressive delivery webinar that I did a few weeks back, where I want to safely deploy. But at each step along the way, so I want to do a canary maybe that says, hey, I want to expose 10 or 15% of the traffic to this new build. How am I making data-driven decisions there? I'm not going to stop the pipeline. and then go look at logs and metrics. No, I need an automated process for doing that. I need to make a data-driven decision in my blue-green scenarios where, okay, I've deployed green now. Can I tear blue down? Is it ready? Maybe I want to wait 15 minutes and do a data-driven analysis. Again, automating that process to be able to make those decisions, to manage risk, manage quality, and manage velocity. These are the keys, and we're going to see this as part of the App Engine deployment and the ECR or the ECS deployment that I'm going to do as part of the demo piece. So again, what does automation mean in these contexts? And again, I think those of you that may have seen this before, it's about decision gates. Now, depending on sort of again your regulatory environment, those may need to be human assisted or they could be automated. But if they're human assisted, we need to make sure that all the data and all the context is there for the human. Right? We don't want someone going off and looking at 6 different systems, hoping that they don't look at the previous set of test results instead of this set of test results. We want to eliminate some of that. We want to make sure that those gates, those command and control gates that we have put in place are actually first-class citizens. They're able to actually stop the pipeline if it warrants it. And then ultimately, we need to automate the process around anomaly detection. We need to make sure that we can do our rollbacks based on, or roll forwards based on data-driven decisions, so that we understand not just, hey, this met the functional spec, but how is it operating? What does the SRE say, right, when they take a look at some of that data? And how do we automate a process for giving an anchor for the pipeline to ultimately make that decision? Or again, if it's necessary, a human to make that decision. And so that's really sort of those pillars of making sure that we can add automation to these types of scenarios. So this is the part where I do a quick OpsMX commercial, and I think a lot of you probably have seen this, and I think OpsMX is what we're really about, and where we have a passion is for delivering software with as much automation as possible. Our CEO likes to say our guiding light, or our North Star, is software delivery with no human intervention. And we understand that that's a lofty goal. But I think at the same time, the idea behind this is we want to add automation. We want to add automation wherever we can. We want to be able to allow that automation to make data-driven decisions around, again, that 3-legged stool I talked about. So, I need to be able to deliver quickly. So I want to go from commit to or source to prod as fast as I can. But along the way, I need to make sure that it's compliant. I need to make sure that it is safe. And I also need to make sure that there's a record of it happening, so that I can audit this whole thing and I can understand what happened. God forbid I have a problem and I have to do a post-mortem. How do I know what happened? How do I trace back the efficacy of the last release and the release before that to try and run down, sort of where in that stack I ran into a problem? What bit of data wasn't interpreted correctly? So being able to go ahead and do that, and then forgetting about all that stuff for a moment, if I fall under the sort of the SOX 2 or the SOC Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, I need to be able to produce logs and audits for all this stuff. And again, not the best way to spend a Saturday, right, is to go through and dig through looking to create an audit report for an auditor that's coming in on a Monday. And so we want to make sure that that's buttoned up tight, and end to end your process just runs and allows you to focus on your business. So what I want to do next is I want to take you through a couple of pipelines that I've put together. And I use these pipelines from time to time, depending on sort of the customer situation. But I love to sort of, whenever I do one of these webinars, I love to go through and ultimately do one of these, walkthrough of a couple of these pipelines, so you can sort of see this thing in action. And so let me go ahead and actually make sure enter full screen, and then I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. I have a large monitor, and so hopefully that's a little easier to see. So the first application that I have here is actually being deployed to Google App Engine. App Engine is a serverless technology that allows you to go ahead and actually take your application, push it up to the system, and ultimately it gets deployed. There's no scaling issues to worry about. There's no infrastructure problems to worry about. It just is very, very simple. And this here is basically a continuous deployment. Essentially what this pipeline does is it ultimately does the equivalent of what we might consider a blue-green type of deployment. But let me walk you through the detailed steps here, just so you can kind of get a flavor. So the first thing I did is I've got to have a trigger for this thing. And so I happen to be using an on-prem version of GitLab in my laboratory here. And so basically I'm listening for a webhook that's coming from GitLab. And let me, this recording button always gets in my way. So here's my GitLab repo, and this is the application repo. It's very, very basic, very straightforward. And my webhook is here. If I look at, look at webhooks, and so it's right here. It's basically monitoring all the events that are happening in this repository, so that if there's a change made in this repository, this pipeline is going to kick off. It's going to go ahead and trigger Spinnaker to go ahead and kick off that pipeline. Now, the first thing I'm doing is deploying my new application code, right? So this new application code, the scenario here is I just got a commit to master. Somebody submitted a pull request. It was approved and then committed to master. This triggered my App Engine deployment. Here, as you can see here, App Engine is a first-class citizen in Spinnaker. So it's very easy. I can simply set up my App Engine deployment. When I configure my app here, and it asks what cloud providers I want to use, you can see App Engine there being that first-class citizen. That's there and ready to go. Now, when I look here, the first thing I'm going to do is deploy that new code. Now, I've got a load balancer out in front of this thing, so deploying this new code right now, it's pretty benign. But when I do that, we can look here and see, sort of the way I'm going about it, right? So I've got it knows the Git repo that I'm using. It knows the branch that I want to monitor. I just gave this a default, the stack name is default. And I've given it my config path. So my app.yaml is the config path for this very, very basic application. And so I'm going to go ahead and actually do this deployment. And during this step, I'm going to go ahead and actually build the application and then deploy it to App Engine, right? And that will get deployed to that App Engine platform. Now, the next step I'm going to take here is I'm going to go through the process of redirecting some of the traffic to that. So this here is sort of a canary type of deployment that I'm doing using App Engine. And so we can see here what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start with my newest server group. The one I just created in the previous step is only going to get 5% of the traffic, right? And so this is the cluster, and it's going to target the newest server group. And then ultimately, I'm going to keep 95% of my traffic with my previous server group, so the previous deployment. So this here is giving me the ability to do a real easy canary deployment here, right? The load balancer is going to then now shift or shape the traffic toward that new code. It is going to just do 5%. Now, depending on sort of how much traffic you see in general, you might want to bump that up to 10 or 15. The bottom line here is that the only constraint you have is it has to add up to 100%, obviously. And then I'm going to validate the new application code. Now, this validation could take a number of different forms, right? Now, what most of our customers are doing is they are ultimately going through the process of wiring up. So they're using, whether it be Elastic or some other, sort of, or Prometheus or the native tools that are available in Google to actually ultimately monitor the logs and metrics for that deployment. So what they're doing here is they're collecting that data as that 5% of the traffic happens, and that gate in this case is, I think I've got it set up for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And ultimately what's happening here in this pipeline is the OpsMX layer that works with Spinnaker is triggering an analysis and pulling in the data that's associated with that particular application. In this case, it's doing a log and metric analysis, and ultimately is going to return any of that anomalous behavior. So I've got a handful of metrics that I'm looking at here, and then the logs. It's going ahead and looking at those things and interpreting. So that as I'm doing that sort of canary build, I can do one of two things. Now in this case here, just to make it easier to understand, what I did was I just put a wait stage in here, and the idea is that I would be coming over and looking at those metrics and those logs and the analysis that the OpsMX autopilot product did to ultimately make a decision. Now, if I wanted to, I could actually automate that process. If I wanted to, I could ultimately say, hey, let's take the confidence score. And if the confidence score that gets generated by OpsMX is above 96, go ahead and proceed. If it falls below 90, 96, stop the pipeline so someone can come in and take a look at it. And so I'm doing that level of analysis here. And then assuming that this passes, assuming that I'm ready for this to go on, whether it's automated or human assisted, the next step obviously is going ahead and enabling the new code. So now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and ultimately make sure that I've enabled this so that I'm getting in my App Engine account, I'm enabling the newest server group. So now this is actually going to take the primary position, right? So I'm going to go from 5% of the traffic to 100% of the traffic, and that's how I'm going about doing that, is enabling this new code, as part of that App Engine piece. And again, this is all, guys, done without having to run a Kubernetes cluster. This is, all done through this serverless technology from Google. I'm waiting for a server group to warm up. So I'm waiting for this to fire up. And then I'm ultimately removing the old application code. So this here is that previous server group. I'm going to go ahead and actually remove that old server group. And so again, when we look at this and we see what I'm doing, I'm basically easing in that old code for the new code. I've put a couple of circuit breakers in there to make sure I can check what's going on. But the idea behind this is I'm continuing to write my applications and architect my application the way I always have, right? Google has got, this platform that ultimately in a serverless way will allow me to deploy this. It will handle the scaling. It will handle all of those things for me so that I don't have to deal with it. And, if I look here, I can look at, sort of get to the application here, and we'll see sort of a blue screen here with a little hello world application. So that's deployed. So that's how that works, guys. I think it's important to sort of walk through those steps. But again, this service from Google is a first-class citizen in Spinnaker and allows you to very quickly and easily deploy to that. Now, the other pipeline that I wanted to walk through is using the Elastic Container Services from Amazon. And again, I think the scenario is relatively the same, right? Now in this case here, I'm running it on a cron, but frankly, if I was doing this in real life, what I would do is I'd be monitoring for, say, a Jenkins job, right? When I knew that I was building a new container or a new image that I was ultimately going to push up to ECR, I would then go ahead and actually start to kick off this pipeline. And I can, certainly add that trigger here if I want to, just sort of, if I look for Jenkins here and listen for that Jenkins job, right? I could even go further left and say, hey, I want to use Spinnaker to trigger the Jenkins job just by monitoring the Git repo. So I have a couple of different options there. But the important part here is that I'm then going ahead and grabbing that image, and this was a tag that I put on that image. It also supports, sort of a full path, scenario when I push this up to ECR for that particular image. So it's going to go ahead and actually ask me for that, or I'm going to put a step in there to identify that image that I want to grab. And then ultimately, when I look to deploy this, I'm going to go ahead and actually go down the path of, again, going down and interacting directly with the cloud platform. You can see here, I can pick a strategy of red, black, and I can ultimately do a rollback so that, and red, black, guys, for those of you that aren't aware, is the blue-green of Spinnaker, right? Spinnaker has chosen to call it red-black. And I can also control the scale down process once the new code is in place, right? And so ultimately, if there is an error here with this rollout, if something goes wrong or something goes bad, because I've chosen the red-black strategy, it will simply revert to the old and fail my pipeline. So my application stays up. And again, I think, looking at this and understanding sort of, the interaction that we can have, and you can see here, this launch type is a Fargate instance in this particular case. So this is going to get launched to Fargate as a platform using that container service. And so that's that piece. And then, the next thing I might want to do is ultimately go down the path of, kicking off a Jenkins job to validate my new deployment, right? So a lot of cases I'll go ahead and actually generate some artificial traffic, and I'm back here again, right? I'm back to looking and using the OpsMX autopilot product to ultimately go through and validate that traffic as I've gone through it and see if there are any anomalies. But again, I've gone ahead and built that new image. I've deployed that new image. I've started to test that new image. I've got my verification gate here, which based on the score or the confidence score that my autopilot system gives that, I can automate that process, or I could insert a manual judgment gate here if I wanted a human to take a look at it. And then I make my push decision, right? In which case, if in this case here, I've put a manual judgment that says roll the deployment forward, in which case it will go ahead and actually disable the old server group, or I could say roll the deployment back. Now I could add and base it based on this verification gate back here, make this decision automated. But either way, if I chose to disable the new server group because I found a problem, I'm using the conditional expressions here. And again, Spinnaker, in this context is giving you that if then that this type of scenario. And then again, you can see here, disabling the newest server group because I've sensed a problem, and that's because I've rolled the deployment back was the choice that was made in that previous manual judgment step. Or if roll the deployment forward was made, then it will go ahead and actually tear down the previous server group. So again, I can build that error logic in here. I can ultimately go down that path of deploying, and I get all the benefits that we've seen for sort of that serverless deployment, or that cloud native type of architecture, where I can go ahead and actually deploy my slightly less broken down application stacks to these services, and not have to worry about managing any of the pieces that go along with it. And so that's just a couple of examples, guys. And I always like to leave you with a couple of those examples so that you can really sort of get your arms around sort of what's important and actually have seen it in action. So guys, looking at the clock, I'm at about time here. So let's stop, and I want to turn it back over to Mark to see if there are any questions.
Great. Hey, Bob, that is a great presentation and demo. It's really interesting. And please enter your questions in the chat. And while you're doing that too, what we'll do is we have one last poll. If you can please fill the poll out while we're responding to questions. Bob, it's pretty interesting. It just brings the point home that you really need a tool, a solution like Spinnaker that is just how versatile Spinnaker is. Because when you had that slide up that showed, how companies or IT organizations transition maybe from monolith to containerization to microservices, from the presentation, it's not a synchronous journey, right? A lot of times, all three of those are happening at once, right?
Yeah, no, because rarely as an organization are we managing just one application, right? And they're all, so and that's where I think that slide maybe does the situation a slight disservice, because you have to think about that thing not from a company perspective, but on an application by application level, right? And so when you're managing maybe 15, 20, 100, 150, 200, applications, think about that for a moment, right? And sort of needing the tooling to make sure that you can do effective delivery regardless of where any one of those applications sits on that spectrum.
Yeah, and so that's, to me, sort of what's so compelling is to have a solution like Spinnaker and OpsMX that has that versatility to work in this hybrid environment, because especially in larger organizations, a lot of that's all going on at once as they transition, right? As they're on this journey. So look, we're coming up. We're actually running a little over. Everyone fill out the form. If you have other questions, you can contact us. You got Bob's email and you got the info email. I want to thank everybody for their time today. Appreciate it, Bob. Thank you very much. And we'll see you on the next one, everybody. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll talk to everyone soon.
Bye-bye.